Okay, so we are running a little behind time, so we're going to probably move right into the next panel. There is a break during the lunch period where we can have time, to informally ask questions for Billy and Nasima. I just wanted to say a couple things. There's a very fascinating presentation, and in Florida, we are building a lot of rail hubs right now. There's I don't know if you all know this or not, but Miami Central is the largest TOD in the United States that was under construction over the last 5 years. So this is very relevant. I was reading in Greta Thunberg's climate book a week or two ago that the potential heat raise in this part of the world could potentially make life almost unlivable within our lifetimes. So, by 2050, beyond the 2050s, it's an edited book. I highly recommend it, called The Climate Book, edited by Greta Thunberg, that people are going to start migrating to places like Canada and northern Russia because of the number of days that are going to be uninhabitable because of extreme temperatures. And so, this is something that is very relevant as we are building new infrastructure to think about on the front end and not on the back end. It's a lot cheaper to incorporate these sorts of engineering and adaptation principles as we're building new stations in places like Boca, Aventura, West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and they're going to build 6 new train stations along the FEC corridor in northern Miami, and then eventually that's going to continue through Broward and Palm Beach County. So you're talking probably 40, potentially up to 40 new train stations just here in the 3 counties, not including other rail hubs that will be built on other corridors. So Nasima, thank you. I have not seen a presentation like that combines transit-oriented development with urban heat islands. It's very thought-provoking, so I really appreciate that. So I would like to turn it over to Dr. Peter Cruz, who is going to lead us in a panel on ethical considerations for planning resilience. Peter, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. If I could have my co-presenters come up here, Vice Mayor Maria Marino, City of Naples City Manager Jay Boodheshwar, and Deputy Director of the Transportation Planning Agency Brian Ruscher. Okay, my panelists here have a couple PowerPoint slides, which I'll get to in a minute. But I am, one of my many jobs is I'm Palm Beach County Commissioner on Ethics. And when I was asked by John Rennie to come here and talk about the ethics and the ethical dilemmas of planning for resilience, I had to do a little bit of a deep dive because I really am interested in what elected and appointed officials are doing unethically and how we can reprimand them. So I had to go to a much broader level, and a lot of the literature on ethics and ethical dilemmas in climate change is global. And yet here in South Florida, we know, especially Southeast Florida, we have a resiliency problem that really hasn't been investigated very well yet. Jay Boodheshwar had a very rude awakening when he went to Naples from the East Coast here about how to get resilience. Hurricane Ian, and he'll tell you all about that, about what he had to face when he first went there. But some of the ethical issues that I want to talk to our panelists about after we go through is some of the issues that come up on a global level. Some are applicable here, and some aren't ones we have to face yet. We have a concept in ethics, climate migration. And John just pointed that out. Are there places where we won't be able to live anymore, so there'll be migrations from one point to another? There are some countries that are, the Marshall Islands, some other, the Maldives, are sinking and will be underwater. And so where do those people go? So that's one thing to think about, and this displacement of people. How about the equity involved in where these people go? Do we accept certain people in certain countries, but not people in other countries? Can our political system here in the United States, which is under stress now, can we possibly deal with this overlay of migration and resiliency, especially if the money involved is going to have to be a federal response? There's only so much the 3 counties can do down here and the state of Florida can do. Some of these resiliency problems are so big, they're going to need a federal response at some point. And then I'm sort of hesitant to bring up the R word. In the state of Florida, we're a state agency here, but there is discussion literature. Do we owe some areas, countries, people, counties some reparations for what has been done over the years? And so that's just sort of one crazy topic I wanted to bring up. But I believe Jay's presentation, do you have that queued up? I think Jay actually has a very nice PowerPoint slide, and I actually forgot to introduce the rest of the panel in more detail here. Jay Boodheshwar is I should have done that. Jay Boodheshwar is, as I mentioned, the city manager of Naples, Florida. Before serving, beginning in Naples in May 22, he served in leadership roles in the town of Palm Beach over here, Massillon, Ohio, the city of East Chicago, the city of Bloomington, Indiana, and the city of Munster, the town of Munster, Indiana. His public service experience in local government spans over 29 years with 23 years in senior management roles. He has also held volunteer leadership roles in numerous nonprofit and professional associations. And next to him, of course, is Vice Mayor Maria Marino, Vice Mayor of the Palm Beach County Commission. She served on the Palm Beach Gardens City Council from 2016 to 2020 and was the city's mayor in 2017 and 2018. Maria is the chairman of the Solid Waste Authority of Palm Beach County, the Palmar Water Control District, and Bioscience Land Protection Advisory Board, and is the vice chair of the Palm Beach County Transportation Planning Agency and the secretary-treasurer of the Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. So you have a lot of exposure. Right, exactly. And finally, on the far right is Brian Ruscher, who serves as the Palm Beach County Transportation Planning Agency's Deputy Director of Multimodal. An unconventional transportation planner trained in environmental and community health. Over the past decade, he has developed an active, equitable infrastructure initiatives in both the public and private sector and on projects large and small. This includes major roadway and transit corridor plans, statewide and regional trail plans, mobility plans, and ADA improvements. And he's also a rugged road biker because he and I have been on a bike team together for about 7 years now. But anyway, so Jay, could I have you come up and...
Great, thank you. Actually, I'm going to put this, well, no, I'm going to hold this. So thank you, Peter. Good morning, everyone. One of the things that Peter forgot to include in my bio is the fact that I am a graduate of FAU. And I did my MPA here at Florida Atlantic, so I'm a proud owl. All right. We need applause for that. So, as Peter said, I spent quite a bit of time, actually about half of my career, maybe a little bit more than half of my career in public service here on the East Coast, and specifically in the town of Palm Beach. And I thought, working on a barrier island in a hurricane-prone area was something that, would be concerning. And of course, we dealt with our share of hurricanes during my time here. But little did I know that this place called Naples on the west coast of Florida that sits at 3 feet of elevation on the Gulf of Mexico and the Naples Bay, warming climate, rising sea levels. What could go wrong? 5 months into my time in the city of Naples, Hurricane Ian came through, and it was the definition of a perfect storm. Its trajectory, its speed, its pressure, all kinds of variables led to a situation where we received about 10 feet of surge in the deepest area of town. Most of the community was underwater. I stood on the steps of City Hall and watched the water rise above cars and get within 3 inches of the top steps going into City Hall, and then it stopped, and then it started to retreat. Quite an experience. I literally was able to watch the surge breach the dune for the first time, and that's when we weren't even near high tide. Oh, the other variable was it was a king tide situation that afternoon at the peak of the storm. So when I saw that water breach the dune system, and we were still hours away from the king tide, I knew that this was not going to be good. And the rest is history. I can spend an hour just talking about Ian. I'm not going to do that. I really want to touch on, a couple of things that have been in the works relative to dealing with climate change and rising seas. So I'm going to start with this first slide here. So prior to my arrival, I was actually pleased to see that the city had begun. They were behind, but they had begun the process of doing vulnerability assessments and trying to learn about what the future of Naples is going to look like relative to sea level rise, which is very observable during high tide situations in Naples, and climate change, heat, and so on. So we are wrapping up, and by the end of this year, or by the middle of this year, we will finish up what is called our climate adaptation plan. And I'm not going to read the slides here. The goals are pretty straightforward. We need to identify what our threats are, what our vulnerabilities are, and then begin developing plans. You can go to the next slide. So we are actually wrapping up phase 2, which is the planning. And later this year, we'll be prioritizing, and that will roll into the budget. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of work that needs to be done over the next 10 to 15 years. And then phase 3 is the implementation. Next slide. So, the focus, obviously, when we're thinking about climate change, everyone's talking about sea level. A couple of our speakers that talked about heat. Heat is one of those issues that, we have to deal with here in South Florida. And here are some stats, and this is within Collier County, the Naples area. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so here's one of the slides, and this is Naples-specific information. As you can see, over the last 50 years, plus 60 years, 70 years, we've been seeing about 3.1 millimeter of sea level rise per year. That may not sound like a lot, but what has happened in the last 20 years or so is it's changed. It's accelerating. We're now seeing in the last 20 years 7.3 millimeters of sea level rise, and the expectation is that's going to change again. So what does that mean? It means that we have streets that are not passable during king tide events in the city of Naples. We have electric cars that try to make it through and they stall out. So this is a real situation. Sunny day, bright blue skies, king tides, backing up into our gravity-based storm systems, and everyone's looking at each other, what is going on? Next slide. These are a couple of slides that I like to use here that show existing conditions during a high tide, heavy rainfall event, and then a 100-year coastal storm. I think Ian was a 1,000-year coastal storm. So you can see the inundation of water during a hurricane situation. What you see here on the right, it was worse than this during Ian. Next slide. We are using a couple of different modeling software. We actually worked with the University of Florida to develop the Acune model to simulate, input different variables and simulate what sea level rise could look like in our community to assist us with our planning efforts. Acune wasn't used in this, but a similar type of model was used for this. Also, let me just digress for a second. Acune we are using from an emergency management perspective. There's dynamic modeling that we can do with the software. Where we literally, we had tested it, we inputted all the variables from Ian, pressure, speed, and so on, and then hit go, and it simulated the surge, and it was spot on what exactly happened. So this is good software, and we'll be using this in future storm scenarios to make sure our emergency responders are properly prepared. We have equipment staged in the right areas, and we can do early evacuation notice. This is the 2040 predictions. You can see in a storm event, we got a problem. Next. And this is 2070. So take a look at the city of Naples over here in a surge situation. There are actually the green areas, that's water. Those are canals and the bay. Everything's underwater. And this isn't using the worst case scenario models. This is using average data. Go to the next slide. Heat. Heat is also an issue. We have a lot of people who work outside. This past summer, we've implemented some new policies. We're buying different types of clothes for our field employees, different types of fabrics. We just don't have water coolers anymore. We have electrolytes. We have actual fluids to help hydrate our employees. These are the modifications we are needing to make with our employees and farm workers. I mean, this is a big issue for those who are working outside. So understanding this is huge. The other thing, too, is the type of material that we are building things with is important. In an increasing warm situation, things melt. You know, different types of plastics and different types of metals that are hot to touch. These are all things that go into the decision making. Next. Let's see. This is average number of days at 95 degrees or more. So you can see what it looked like from 1976 to 2005 in Florida, and what the predictions are, you know, for 12 years or so from now, and then 2070. This is going to be a very hot place if this is accurate. Next. Okay, some more data here. Let's see, by mid-century, our predictions are 60 days of 95-degree temperatures and above, and by the end of the century, 120 days. This is staggering information here. 2023, hottest year on record. You all remember getting the alerts, extreme heat warning. Every week, it seems like there was another extreme heat warnings. 53 days of at least 2 hours of 105 heat index. I tried to play golf in that. Not good. Next. So approaches to adaptation. So there are two different categories we are putting our projects in. One category is called non-physical. These are policies. These are land use codes. These are regulations. These are best practices, things like that. And then there's physical. There's no way around it. We have to change our infrastructure to deal with rising water. And we've identified through this process of our critical facilities, hospitals. We have an airport, our wastewater treatment plant, our water treatment plant. These are all the facilities that are extremely important and are higher priority facilities that we're going to deal with. Next. I'm going to skip over that. These are just some considerations in a prioritization process. Of course, you know, you want the biggest bang for your buck, right? So you want to do the things that's going to create you know, the biggest impact early on. And this is kind of a decision-making matrix here. Next. I'm flying through this. This usually takes an hour to do. Let's see. These are just some I know, I'm flying. These are some, so we have 73 preliminary strategies in our plan. 56 of them deal with water, and 17 of them deal with extreme heat. And you can go on our website, you can see the adaptation plan. It's pages and pages of materials. Next. The other thing that we're doing, that we just finished up, is a multi-basin assessment. These are the 5 most vulnerable areas in our community to sea level rise. And we have identified next projects that need to be done. And these 5 assessment areas, which I think kind of includes about 20% of our land mass, we're going to need to invest in today's dollars over $500 million in infrastructure, mostly changing from a gravity-based storm system to a mechanized one using more pump stations. One of the issues we have, as the tide comes up in the bay, it backs up into the storm sewers and fills up the community. We need to be able to force that water out even during high tide situations. In the short term, we've installed backflow flaps. So as the tides come up, the flaps close, the water can't come in. But then guess what? It rains, and the water has nowhere to go. So we're getting the phone calls either way, high tide or heavy rainfall. But we've got to buy time, and that's today's dollars. I've been trying to prep the community that you need to be thinking between climate adaptation and this, you know, $1 billion to $1.5 billion worth of infrastructure spending in the next 10 to 15 years. Next. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, there's an Army Corps project happening in Collier County. It's called the Collier County Coastal Storm Risk Management Feasibility Study. And that has been a very contentious thing because the Army Corps, you know, they are proposing they were proposing mostly gray infrastructure, metal, concrete, physical barriers. And the community obviously is very concerned about the aesthetics. You know, people are still more concerned about aesthetics. So it's really kind of transitioned to more of a green infrastructure approach, which, you know, has benefits, and there's sustainability benefits there as well with water quality and things like that. But that is something that is highly political, and it's going to take a long time. We are not waiting on a county. We are controlling our own destiny. And I just wanted to make those few comments, and then I have a lot to say about ethics when we're ready. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Mayor Marino, do you want to come next? Thank you. Okay.
All right. Do I need a microphone? Okay, thank you. Oh, all right, swear jar. So I am County Commissioner and Vice Mayor Maria Marino, and I have no idea what ethical governance is. When you sent me the topic, ethical dilemmas in planning for resilience, I'm like, what does that mean? So to give you a little bit about my background, other than what was here, I'm a professional golfer by trade, so I'm outside. I was outside all the time. I ran a children's foundation for 20 years, did philanthropy, real estate broker, did them all at the same time. Yes, I don't sleep. My folks were developers. So when I was writing notes, I was like, okay, what does all this mean? What are we as a government supposed to do? And I'm guessing I'm the only elected official in the room, right? See, no hands went up. How many of you drove here today? Okay, let's talk about our footprint. There we go. So what can government do? Both ethically, actually, there's more than just both. Ethically, morally, what do we do to help sustain our environment for the future? Obviously, building codes. Every time there's a hurricane, our building codes flex a little bit more. So buildings that were built 30 years ago on the intercoastal or on the ocean, we now have to have them, they all have to be assessed. And their board of directors may not have put money aside for the repairs that they are required to do. So what's going to happen to those buildings? They're going to be condemned. Or a developer is going to come in. Now I'm actually going to talk about gentrification for a second, which I think is the next topic, sorry. But a perfect example, in the north end of Palm Beach County, there's a barrier island called Jupiter Island. And the part of that that's in Palm Beach County, there's several multi-story buildings there. Two of those buildings, or two of those parcels, have already been bought by a developer. They've gone in, they've torn down the buildings, and another parcel, it was a bunch of smaller buildings. And now they're putting up luxury high-rises. So the gentrification is happening because here are people that bought their condos a long time ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago, for a equitable amount of dollars. They're getting bought out now for $1.5 million or $2 million for something they might have paid $100,000 for. But where are they going? Where can you get something for $200,000 on the ocean? You can't. So that's what's happening with gentrification. But from a building standpoint and from a sustainability standpoint, the builders are going to come in and they're going to start to ask for waivers because the coastal control line is moving. So they can't be as close to the water as they used to be. So now they're going to have to build further back, but that's now going to change the requirements of setbacks. So that's just a couple of fun things. But how do you do that from a local level? County is not always your first line of government. We have 39 municipalities in our county. So they all have their own building codes and they all have we're all pretty much the same. We all want to be as safe as possible. It has to do with safety and resilience. But when you're working with a municipality, it's a lot easier to get something done than when you move to the next level, which is the county, and then you move to the next level, which is the state, and then you move to federal. And where are the dollars coming from? Oh, gosh. It's much easier at a local level. You were actually supposed to have Chelsea Reed, who's the mayor of the city of Palm Beach Gardens, which is where I was the mayor of, speaking with you from that perspective. But I can tell you what we've done as a city, and as I said, it's easier when you're at the city level. We took a community, 4,800 acres. The building code says, okay, you can put 1 unit for every 10 acres. So that's 480 homes. There was no city water and no city septic. So it would have been 480 homes on city water and city sewer. So 480 homes on well and septic. On the outer boundaries of the city, and when we talk about transit-oriented development, those are not on the outer boundaries of a city. Those are in the city near a rail station, near a highway. So here we have 4,800 acres, way out west of town. Could possibly have 480 homes. Well, the owners of the property came to the city and said, we'd like to build a community. We'd like to capture traffic. We'd like to have everything available here so people don't have to get in their cars and drive the 15 miles to the Gardens Mall, which is one of the greatest malls I love shopping at the Gardens Mall in the world. And it's been there since 1988, and it's still going strong. But anyway, I digress. What we did when we partnered, and it has to do with partnerships. A city can't do it alone. A county can't do it alone. We have to partner, because if we don't, you all are paying for it. All of your tax dollars are paying for it. So by partnering with the developer, this community will have 3,000 homes, a lot more than the 480. But they're putting half of the acreage, so it was 4,800 acres, they're putting 2,400 acres into conservancy. What they're doing with that 2,400 acres, they are restoring it because it was blocked. It was farmland. 100,000 acres of water flow at no cost to the taxpayer. They also gave 110 acres back to the city. By doing that, we're able to build more parks. And the city of Palm Beach Gardens is over 50% green space, by the way. They also gave us 50 acres for economic development. They also gave land to the school board. So by doing this and becoming partners with the city, and also having to partner with the county because it's county roadways that are surrounding this. We're going to get a little city within a city, but it'll also have about 1 million square feet of retail and commercial and services, so no one has to leave the property. So the homes themselves are not as inexpensive as I would like, but you're capturing all that traffic. You're making your sidewalks wide enough that they're multi-use paths. So if you don't want to walk, you can get on your golf cart, which you're probably charging electrically in your house. And God forbid there should be a storm and your electric car runs out of electricity because you're going to need a gas generator to charge that car. Just saying. Am I going over in my time? Because I could keep going, but no, I already spoke for 10. But really what I want to say is from a county perspective, we partner all the time with businesses and with the folks that come in our building. We are very, it's important to be resilient in what we do, especially for infrastructure near the coastline. And we have 47 miles of coastline right here in Palm Beach County. We have to make sure the dunes are in great shape, because if they're not, and they're washing out the roadways that are right next to the beach, and then it's a progression from the beach to the roadways to the homes and the houses and the condos and the centers that are next to it. We've had some horrible erosion just this year, and you probably saw it on the news where Kid Rock was maybe going to lose his house. Sadly, all of that is private land. There's no public access, so the city, the county, the state, and the feds are not responsible for shoring up that shoreline. Private property, there's no access for the public. So partnerships happen when, from a beach standpoint, from an erosion standpoint, we do beach nourishment programs all the time. The sand waves down this way and it comes back up this way and moves around. But we'll only fund something like that if there is public access for all of you to park your car if you drove there, which I will be. You will be prying the keys out of my cold, dead hands. Sorry, I'm a control freak. But we need to be able to use public and private dollars for restoration, for maintenance of infrastructure, because otherwise it's not going to happen. But if it's private only, the local government, the state, federal, they're not going to pay to refurbish and restore. So it falls on all of us to be diligent on how we spend our dollars, where we spend our dollars. Are you buying on the ocean? If you're buying on the ocean, beware, you probably can't get insurance, which is another whole issue for all of us at the county, because homeowners insurance is going through the roof. And then, we talk to the state and they don't want to do anything about it. So how ethical is that? I don't know. But I'm going to hand over the mic because I could keep talking. Okay. Great gentleman, works with the Palm Beach Transportation Planning Authority, has a whole lot more knowledge about transportation than I do, so here you go.
Oh, thank you, Vice Mayor. Thank you. I do have slides. Thank you very much. You should know, our TPA, we love our slides, we love our visuals, of course. Brian Ruscher, I'm the Deputy Director of Multimodal at the Transportation Planning Agency, and for those who don't know, every urbanized area has a metropolitan planning organization. We are the TPA in Palm Beach County. We work with Broward, Miami-Dade to basically take the federal money and some of the state money even and prioritize where that money goes. Because we do have a very large transportation system. We have one of the largest counties east of the Mississippi. So we have a lot of things to think about in how we move people and especially how we grow and expand. Next slide. Generally speaking, our transportation planning process is about 25 years in the making. So that's where the MPO lives. We live in the 25-year process. So raise your hand if you work for a city or a county government. I'm interested in who's all in the room. If you're academic, institutional, okay, private sector. All right, good. So we have a good mix. Where we live and where we work with and what our goals are really are safe, efficient, connected, multimodal, and of course, resilient. But as we've built up Palm Beach County, it looks a little bit more like the next slide, please. This is what our infrastructure for moving most of our people in South Florida. There's 200,000 trips per day on 95 at the most extreme sections in South Florida. If you look at Palm Beach County's roads, they're also very reflective of this. How we move our traveling public is very auto-centric. And we have this community where a lot of our roadways are built out. If you look at Palm Beach County, our right-of-ways can't really get much larger without taking impacts of homes, businesses, and other metrics. We can get some improvements at traffic signals, we can get some turn lanes and other things that really help out, but without expanding westward or further into the EAA or other areas that are more environmentally sensitive, that's where people might grow and live unless we start thinking about doing things a little bit differently. Next slide. In South Florida, our transportation emissions have gone up 58% since 1990. Individually, about 5%, and that's according to some data that the New York Times processed. Of those emissions, the EPA estimates that about 58, I want to say percent, are light-duty vehicles. So the cars that we're all driving around, right? The small SUVs, sedans, passenger vehicles. The greenhouse gas emissions are largely led by individuals who are driving their own vehicles, and that makes up the largest share of impacts nationally. So what are we going to do about this problem? And it alludes to some of the commentary that many of the speakers before have spoken to with respect to how we can create more resilient green and gray infrastructure and how we can plan for our cities. Next slide. Again, we've built our community where you can buy, fuel, maintain, service, and tint your car windows. So if you look at this, it's the intersection of Palm Beach Lakes Boulevard and Okeechobee Boulevard. This is not a great way to think about the places that we want. This is definitely a pass-through place. This is not somewhere where people will stop and appreciate the community for what it is. Just on the far right side of the screen is the Westgate CRA. On the left side is a very automotive and industrial and a connection to 95. This is not a place. This is a pass-through area. So what we could do differently and how we can think differently and what the Transportation Planning Agency at the leadership of our governing board is trying to think about how we can shift and create a different context for this area while appreciating and recognizing the infrastructure that is there now. Yep. So I think that that is a really important point too, because as we start thinking about communities as well and where we're building and how we're building out, we'll make a difference. Can I get the next slide, please? So the Palm Beach TPA has been leading a number of corridor studies which are looking at how we can concentrate transit-oriented development along transit-oriented corridors. And I think it's important to draw a distinction. TOD is really great. I think that it's one of the things that's going to move the needle on how we shift our population into more sustainable modes. But unless we're talking about the first mile and the last mile connections, unless we're talking about building a user base along the transit line through a transit-oriented corridor, the nodes that we're developing will only be able to get you so far. Because what's ultimately going to drive transit investment and transit ridership is the development along the whole of the corridor. And if our cities are not working with our county, and if our county is not working with our state, we will not have the successes and transit improvements that we're looking for and that we're seeing today. Next slide. So as I alluded to, there's a vision that we've crafted for all of Palm Beach County that would move people to about 90% of their jobs, about 74% of the population in 2045. This is one of the corridors. So we've come up with 11 different corridors for high impact transit. This is a light rail concept with shared use paths on the side, as Vice Mayor Marino was alluding to. Light rail running down the median of Okeechobee Boulevard, separated bike lanes, as well as transit-oriented development with park and ride. Next slide, please. This would connect you from the State Road 7 and Wellington, which is at a popular equestrian community, very, very popular international destination, to the international destination of downtown West Palm Beach. And again, you know, we've created largely pass-through communities. But if you look at what happens when you start to add into the elements of TOD and adding in elements of light rail and connectivity, you really have a beneficial impact to the community overall. And I'll speak to some of those impacts if I could get next slide. This is just a visual of what it could look like at the ground level. Again, you're maintaining an excessive amount of vehicle capacity for what it's worth next to a transit line, 6 lanes in either direction with turn lanes, and multimodal improvements at the edges. Next slide again, please. And I think it's important to note, who here has ridden Brightline? I'm really hoping that most of the people, okay, good. So this is the station in 2016, and there was a huge question at the time, and I think that question has largely been answered. If you you could hit the next slide. Does infrastructure drive development? And absolutely does. If you look at the new development that has come in West Palm Beach between the office, the residential, 2 mixed-use towers, and even senior residential in downtown West Palm Beach, we have seen a transformation of the downtown. We can see that transformation potential along all of our major corridors, but it requires a lot of effort and it requires partnerships, as Mayor Marino alluded to. Next slide. And just to round out the conversation, we identified 17 different station areas along this premium transit corridor. What we could get out of it, I know we have an incredible affordable housing crisis, 17,000 new market rate units, 15% of which, because we love doing affordability looks and seeing what we can get in terms of density from the affordability perspective, about 15% of those would be affordable, 15 million square feet in commercial, and about 9,000 people using the train. So I think that it's important to think about it from not just how can we create our community, but what benefits are we driving? Because if we're not talking about the transit-oriented corridors, and we're not talking to Palm Beach County, we're not talking to Wellington and Royal Palm Beach and West Palm Beach, collaboratively to come together with a vision for the future, we're not going to figure out, one, how to even fund this thing, first and foremost, but then how we can effectively build it and get it to work for everybody in Palm Beach County. Next slide. So thank you. I don't want to take the questions. I think we're excited about that.
Yes, if I could invite our panelists back up here. There were some very interesting things that came up. I'm a third generation Palm Beach County resident. My grandmother was born here, my mom was born here, and I was born here. I remember when my mother and my grandmother were talking, when Henry Flagler opened this part of Florida, there was obviously no air conditioning, and there was just a few months, January to March, that he felt were habitable down here, and that's when he came down, and the season that we know as social season started. And Florida was still considered alligators, swamps, mosquitoes, things like that. Well, when air conditioning and the post-World War II boom came along, we transformed this area. I'm a 3-time graduate of FAU, and I remember coming here when I was an undergraduate and how hot it was before we had built a lot of breezeways here. You had to park out on the runway, and you had to walk in, and it was either blinding rain or hot as hell to try to get over here. And how we've tried to adapt the climate to us. Now, when I saw Jay's slides of the temperature rise here, we are heading back to a desert-like temperature. And who will be living here in 40 to 50 years? I mean, can we air condition our way out of this? I don't think so. That's one issue that, what are we going to do? Can we bend that curve so it's not 80 days above 95 or 105 heat index? That's one thing I'd like to have the panel talk about. Also, maybe you won't have to worry because Naples will be underwater, so it won't matter, right? I guess one of the ethical issues, what do we owe intergenerational equity to future generations? Should we just say, we're just going to worry about the next political cycle in the next few years, and the people that come after us, they're going to just have to figure out whatever they're going to have to figure out? Do we have a massive retreat? Most of our barrier islands, and it's really, everybody wants to live next to the water, and everybody totally gets that. That's the worst place in this state for the next few years to probably live. I mean, we have a record hurricane season predicted coming up. This county is the one that sticks out the farthest east of the entire east coastline. Palm Beach County juts right out, so we're even more exposed than most of the other counties here in Florida. So Palm Beach, Williams Island, Star Island, the incredible amount of wealth that has been poured into those areas that I don't know if there's a wall big enough or a pump strong enough to keep the water and the wind away from those. So if there's a retreat, one of the things that's identified in the literature, if the very wealthy on the coastal barrier islands are forced to move to higher ground, that will displace a lot of folks that are sort of in our marginalized communities. And where will those folks go? They'll be pushed out of where they've been. And if you look at, especially in Dade County, the highest land natural rise above sea level is some of the poorest areas of Miami-Dade County. So that is something which just is beginning, and I think Dr. Herman and I have talked about that. That's just one of our local issues here. There are global issues in ethics with second and third world countries that we're going to have to deal with, but I know everyone here is very interested in where they live and work and how we're going to keep Florida going. So let me ask Jay to start with here. Are you planning in Naples and Collier County that somehow you're going to mitigate that disaster scenario that your slide showed? What do you think you have to do to bend that curve? Or you're going to have to move Collier County about 10 miles inland?
Well, Peter, I strategically bought 6 miles inland.
Okay.
Because I know what's coming. No, all kidding aside, it's at this point it's about mitigation. It's about mitigating, this acceleration that we've seen in the last 30 to 50 years. And I'm not a scientist. I try to influence policy based on our subject matter experts that we have on staff and in the academia. To help prioritize and push certain projects. From my perspective, the narrative that I'm trying to create within the community is about investing in it, because people don't want to retreat. People live along the water, and Naples, like Palm Beach Island, is a very wealthy community. In fact, the most expensive house on the market in the country, $295 million, is for sale, if anyone's looking, in Naples. Okay, I'll talk to you afterwards. So people don't want to retreat. So they're listening now. They're listening. Well, what do we need to do then to make sure retreating, at least in the near future, being in the next 50 to 100 years, what do we need to do? And it is about figuring out how to fund these resiliency projects. One of the issues, and you were talking about ethical dilemmas, we have a resident in Naples who I know very well. His initials are Senator Rick Scott. And he was governor for a while, and for a long time, there were certain words that weren't allowed to be used. Climate change was one of them. And the reality is, if you don't acknowledge at a policy level, at a government level, that there is an issue, there isn't an emphasis being placed on dealing with that issue. So we're a little bit behind in terms of planning and figuring out funding to deal with these issues. But now it's real, because the streets are flooded, and they weren't flooded 10 years ago. So something is happening, and people don't want to move. So it's about changing that narrative, not necessarily to scare people, but we can actually improve real estate values and keep them climbing if we invest in the right type of infrastructure to get us out of the water and get it pumped.
Okay. I'd like to ask Vice Mayor Marino, you talked about the ethics of displacing coastal residents who bought at a different time, but now they're building after the Surfside collapse. They can't afford the review, the new insurance costs, and things like that. About where are those folks going to go? But I guess the broader question is that we have some very perverse incentives in our system here. We are paying people to stay in places that they probably should not stay anymore. There are some condos, developments along Palm Beach County, and you know where they are, that are built on the sand on east of 81A. Now, in the late 60s and early 70s, when I was here when those were built, the beach went way out. Nobody was thinking of anything. Those folks constantly get battered, and they're constantly doing mitigation. Should we be paying for that either through government, state or local or federal, or even insurance? If we keep telling people they can stay in places that they shouldn't stay. Barrier Island was developed by nature to keep the coast, the mainland, protected, not to build huge condos and because $295 million homes. But anyway.
Well, considering what we have to do now when we build, I believe that you're going to see more of these units actually get torn down and then build to code, today's code, build further away from the ocean. Government itself is going to have to adjust its codes in order to accommodate building. I would love to say we should just stop building and then people won't come, but that's not actually going to ever happen because we are now known as Wall Street South. Folks want to be here. They realized, and I had a conversation with a real estate broker. I said, my God, they're coming in droves after COVID. He says, Maria, they were always going to come, but COVID showed them that they could come and work remotely from here. So while we are gaining down here, which helps our taxpayers, helps our tax base, because people want to come here because of the services that we offer. And so I'm flipping your question. People want to come here because of the services that we offer, the security that we have. We can only pay for those with the taxes that people pay. So there's two ways that we can get tax dollars. Well, actually, there's more than that. But what you pay for your home, your ad valorem taxes, or what you pay in a surtax that comes back to the county. Right now, we have an infrastructure surtax, which is 1% of what, when you go to the store and you buy a product and you are a transient, you're helping to defray costs here locally. Not just our taxpayers are doing that. So as we build new buildings, we actually get a larger tax base. As those buildings where someone bought in for $200,000 and they homesteaded, so their taxable value might only be $300,000, where if somebody came in today and bought that unit, it might be $1 million. If all of the units are brand new, the tax base raises. If we stop building, will they stop coming? They'll probably figure out a way to come, and we're still going to have to, we will still be in the process of gentrification, which is why you see a lot of migration out of Palm Beach County to Martin County or St. Lucie County. But having grown up in Norwalk, Connecticut, how much it costs to live in New York City, even if you worked there, you lived in a bedroom community in Connecticut or in New Jersey, and you took a train. So what we're experiencing here isn't all that much different than in other places. But if we do all these TODs, we all have these buildings that are generating a lot of heat. So it is really the chicken or the egg, and that's the position we're in right now. We can't say we're going to stop building. We can't afford to stop building. So we need to make sure that when we build, we're building green and we are building to code for the 1,000-year storm, the hurricanes, and all of that. And that's what's happening along the coastline right now. So I didn't really answer your question the way you asked it.
That's okay.
But
I think
I am a politician.
I think
no.
I think Jay had wanted to elaborate on that.
I think you can jump on that.
Yeah, when you said the word gentrification earlier is one of the things that were in my notes, and so housing inventory here in South Florida, where everybody wants to be, it's finite. I mean, yes, there's some new construction happening, but at some point we're done. So it becomes a supply and demand issue, which is going to drive prices, and eventually There's going to be redevelopment happening, and we're seeing a lot of that in Naples, and I'll get to that here in a second. But when I got here in 2006, it was top of the market. People were selling their homes. They're moving to Georgia, moving to South Carolina, and they were doing that not because of climate, not because of sea level rise. What we are seeing and what we saw in Naples in terms of gentrification deals with climate issues. So does anyone here know about the FEMA 50% rule? Okay, so the FEMA 50% rule is in place to try and avoid repetitive losses. We don't want, none of us wants the federal government to keep sending money to people who get flooded, get destroyed, and they don't mitigate their property to avoid the next loss. So here's the problem. Along the coastlines in condos, we just had a condo sale, $120 million. People bought these properties for $60,000 to $100,000. They're getting $2.5 million per unit because they can't rebuild, they can't restore. They have to rebuild. So we have a lot of older families, lower income. There's actually lower income neighborhoods in Naples that can't afford to rebuild because more than 50% of the cost to restore in kind doesn't allow them to. Once the value of the renovation exceeds 50% of the value of the structure, you have to elevate. And a lot of these homes is not worth it. Now you're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's cost prohibitive. Developers they're just standing in line, ready to write checks, and people are leaving. Where are they going? They're going to Alabama. They're going to well, some of them are going to Sebring. They're going to the middle of the state. So, you know, climate migration, I call them climate refugees. But it's a real issue, and it's one of those things. It's like, come on, FEMA, you know, these people are hurting, but at the same time, do we want to keep repeating this damage every time? So that's one of those ethical dilemmas that I've really struggled with during Ian.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting you talk about the storms. I don't know how many people were here in the 04, 05 era where we had 8 hurricanes, you know, coming all over the place here. And at the end of, I guess maybe it was Wilma, the last one that came, people were saying, who's going to, this is it. This is the end of Southeast Florida. No one will come back here. And of course, it just went on like fire. Yeah, it went on fire after that. So you are correct, unless there could be a superstorm, a Category 10, whatever, that might actually change that. But even with nature throwing everything it did at us in 04, 05, look at the population, look at the growth since then. But I'd like to pass it down to Brian Ruscher. And I know you and Dr. John Rennie here are not of the Robert Moses School of building transportation, basically cutting through neighborhoods and putting elevated freeways. The Overtown example is probably the worst one we have here in South Florida. Do you see any, you have some very, really great conceptual plans about how we should change our arteries. Do you see any ethical issues? It doesn't look like we're going to impact new neighborhoods. It seems like we're just trying to repurpose what we have.
Yeah, I think that there's a few things loaded into this question. First and foremost, I look at climate change in the same way I look at transportation. It's never as good as it's going to get today. So if you're driving in and you feel like there's a lot of congestion, guess what? In 2050, we'll have grown by about 500,000 people to 2 million people in Palm Beach County. South Florida overall is going to go from 6 to 7 million. So Palm Beach County is going to grow a lot more proportionally. And we are looking at how we can do things in the existing right-of-way. And we are looking at how we are spending our $4 billion every 5 years, every 5-year transportation improvement cycle on these investments. I mean, we're 8 and 10 laning the turnpike right now through Palm Beach County. I mean, that's a serious transportation investment that has, I think, questionable, ethics to it. Frankly, if we're reinvesting into the system of, greenhouse gas emissions over greenhouse gas emissions while widening our highways, trying to force development further out west, and eating into the green space that we have in Palm Beach County, that will have very serious ethical implications, maybe not for us, but absolutely for the people in the future. And I think that requires a little bit more of a spotlight.
Yes, by the way, that picture of 95, you have it there, that was trying to get here this morning. That was exactly how it looked. John, do we have, I know we're behind towards lunch. Do we have time for audience questions if anybody has any?
Well, why don't we grab lunch?
Okay.
And if, we have about 5 or 10 minutes for the next panel. If people want to ask questions,
These are our experts here, yes, and they can do that. Okay.
So, I mean, why don't we just do it informally?
Okay.
That way, because I think people probably need a break and get up and get their lunch.
Okay.
So let's give them a round of applause.
Thank you, guys.